Sechta Bava basra, 3 lines on the top on Pei Tes Amud Aleph. Makom shanogu lamed megasa, in a place where they had the minig to measure with a large measure. So we said we shouldn't do it with a small measure because he loses, because every time he does it with a small measure, for every little measure he has to, in a place where they have a minig to go over and to go over the top, or by tilting, he would lose much. The meicha would lose much more. That's why we go according to the place. If it's according to the place where the minig is gasa, the meicha shouldn't lose. Now he gives you some money about what we're going to be talking about. In goichin, one cannot balance. Ba'gadmin, that's talking about the superintendents, the inspectors. Ubelitra, and that's with a liter as a measurement to shleisha, and 3 with esa and 10 nefesh mishkalis, that's the fulcrum, that's the circle in which there's a scale on which the 2 trays sit on. So the middle, the stick that's holding the 2 trays, the 2 trays has a middle ball which is called a fulcrum. And then he brings down the machik, the leveler of a thick loisasu. You should do loyasa. One shouldn't make. Okay, we're going to talk about these cases. How do we know you're not allowed to smoothen out and in a place where the minig is that they do over the top, meaning where they heap it, that it goes over the walls of the keli, and one cannot heap over the walls of the keli in a place where the people level it. Tamalemi comes the pasuk and says in the pasuk, Eifa Shlema, a perfect measure. So what do we learn out from this? Manayin, from where do we learn out She'im, that if the Mecha came to be Meshana from this Makim, from the Minig HaMakim, that you're not allowed to do it. And he says, he says, I'm going to smoothen out, level it out in a place where they usually they pile it up above the kevi. Or and he tells them, but this is on the condition, that since the place is a place where you level out the kli, you don't give more than the walls of the kli, and it's a place, he's leveling it out, and even though it's a place where you don't usually give like a third more, but he says he's doing it with the condition, he's going to deduct from the price for the buyer, min adamim, from the money that he usually charges, because he didn't heap it, he didn't fill it up a third more. Or from where do we know that if he says, I'm going to heap it in a place where it's normally level, but his kavanah was to add, tell the kohen, listen, normally it's leveled, I'm going to charge you more money because now I gave you a heap, and it's a place where we only sell it leveled. Al Adam is going to add to the price. How do we know that we don't listen to him? Says the Gemara, because it says Talmud Leima, because in the pasuk it says Eifa Shleima Batzedek Yilecha, a perfect and just measure you shall have. So the Batzedek is extra to teach you that you have to go according to the Minig HaMakim. Sagt the Gemara, from where do we know that one is not allowed to balance it in a place where the custom is to tilt it to make sure that there's a little bit more of this chayda or the merchandise? And how do we know that one cannot tilt in a place where they do the exact balance on the weights? Talmud Lema comes the pasuk and says, a perfect weight. From where do we know? How do we know in a place where they don't sell it in a balanced way? that you don't sell, you don't balance it in a place where you tilt it. And how do we know we don't tilt in the place where they balance it? Then later comes the pasuk and says, Evan Shlema, that it has to be a complete stone, a perfect weight. So the Gemara Menayin She'im Amareini Ma'ayin B'Makar Shemachriim. How do we know that if the Meichik came to be Meshanef in the Minig HaMakim and he says, I'm going to balance it in a place where normally you get more scheret, it's tilted, but the Livches Lei Ben Adamim, but being that it's normally tilted and then the buyer is supposed to get more scheret and now he's getting less, so I'm going to deduct it from the price. Or how do I know if he says, I'm going to balance it, I'm sorry, I've tilted. I'm going to tilt it and give you more scheder, where we do it. The minig is to do it exactly, balance it. And he tells him, being that it's a place where normally you balance it, the kavanah is, so now he's tilting it in a place where it's balanced, so he's giving him more scheder than he's supposed to. But he tells him, he tells the Ken, you're going to have to add more money, on the money that normally is sold. Here I tilted it, and this is a place where we don't tilt, so you have to pay more. How do we know he cannot do that? That we don't listen to him. Again, this pasuk of tzedek comes to tell you that you cannot change from whatever the minhag is. Rabbi Yehuda from Suda said, it says in the pasuk that they shouldn't be in your house. So what does it mean it shouldn't be in your house? These weights. Says Matam. Why? What's the reason? He says because the trader says holding Eifa, which means Gedela Katana, and you're holding a Gedela Katana in order to trick the person. And how is he going to trick it? Because he's going to use whatever if he's selling, he's going to use the heavier weight, so he sells them less. And if he's buying, and he's going to use the lighter weight. If he is selling, he's going to use the heavier weight, so he doesn't give him so much. And if he's buying, he's going to use the lighter weight, so he gets more merchandise. So it tells you shouldn't have these two types of weights: the bigger, oversized, undersized. It shouldn't be in your pocket. What's the reason? Meaning, it says twice telling you oversized or undersized stone. Rather, you should be makbid to have Shlema, perfect stone, and the tzedek, and should be righteous. Then yilecha. If you have such a stone, then you will have bekischa. You're going to have in your pockets a lot of money. That's what it means. If you're not going to conduct business in a righteous way, but if you'll have a Evan Shleim of a Tzedek, then Yilecha, then you will have Mam and Harbe. Eifa Shleim of a Tzedek, if you'll have a Eifa measure that's perfect and right, Yilecha, that you'll have it. Bebeischa, you will have in your house. Mam and Harbe, if you conduct yourself in a righteous way, in business, in the correct way. It says, it says, you shall have, it says, yilecha, you shall have. So what does it mean? He takes out the word loy. And the Torah says, perfect and just weights, you shall have, teaches us, shemamidim, agardumin limidois, that we appoint superintendents to check out the weights and the measures. But we don't hire superintendents for the prices. Because with the prices, the Rashbam says, you can't enforce the price. Because if somebody wants to sell for very expensive, it will adjust itself. Because others who need the money will sell it for a lower price, and he's going to be forced to lower the price. Sagt die Mother at the way, Nesi I kimo agarmim in the house of the Nasi. Once appointed Taka superintendent, side for the middays and side for the measure, the weights and measures, and also for the prices. Shmuel said to kind of put Neilu, go out and teach the Raisa, which says that we appoint superintendents for the weights and measures, but we don't appoint superintendents for the prices. No, Karna went out, and he didn't say like the Braisa of Shmuel. And he said, no, that we appoint superintendents even for prices. Side for the weights and side for the prices. Amalei, so when he came out and Karna returned, Shmuel asked him, Mashmach, because he got ripped of what he did. He asked him, what's your name? What is your name? He said, Karna. Karna, which means horns. He says, Tevilei Karna be'enei. So Shmuel said, let the horn grow in his eyes. Nafkalei Karna be'enei. So the Karna grew in his eyes. So it doesn't mean that a literal Karen. The Rashbam says it was a growth that grew over there. And he brings down from the Gemara that Rashbam that says in the Gemara Shabbos that that Rav is the one that cursed that a horn should come out of his eyes. But we could say both of these clothes caused that it should happen. Zog the Gemara, who Take was Kana referring to? He obviously didn't say it on his own. So he said, he said like Rabbi Chama said the name of Rabbi Yitzchak, that we appoint superintendents side for the weights and measures and side for prices. Because of the Amoyim. So the Rashbam says that the Ramoyim, the liars or Ganavim, would wait till the Schira went out for the cheaper price, and then they would charge their high prices. Or they would sell it for lechatchila high prices, and they would say because their quality is better. So we had to, because of these Amoyim, we had to have superintendents. If the kaina requested of the seller lita of schera shekelei lita, so the meicha weighs for a lita chatzi lita. If he wanted a half a lita of schera shekelei chatzi lita, so he weighs for him a chatzi lita. The same is a via lita. If he wanted to schera for a quarter of a lita shekelei the via lita. He would wait for him he should wait for him a quarter of a liter. Like one of my Kamash one. What does the Braisa come to teach us? It's Pasha that the Meicha has to weigh according to what the Keich wants to buy. So the Braisa come to teach you the Mesaknina Maskile Ad Hachi, that we only fix weights up to a reveal of a liter. Less than that, they cannot, it's not exact, and also it could come in to trickery. We can have problems later because it's difficult to tell the small weights from one another, and the dishonest merchants would find it easy to be able to steal from through using these weights. That if the Mekaina wanted from the Beicha 3/4 of a liter, then he should not say to him, wait for me the 3/4 of a liter and do one at a time. Because each time it's not exact, and he would always have to tilt it, and the buyer would gain, of course, but the Meicha would be losing. Rather, the Meicha places 1 liter on one side, umaniach revia liter ima basra, and then he takes the 1/4 of a liter with the basra, which is 3/4 of a liter, and see if it weighs equally, and that's how he would weigh it. That was the best way to do it. So you learned If you requested from the Meicha 10 liters of Schreira, you shouldn't say to him, take 1 liter at a time, and he would always have to tilt it for his favor because he can't be exact. That's not fair. Rather, you take all 10 liters in one as one. And then he does 1 tilt for all 10 liters, so he shouldn't lose for each liter every time that he would put it on the weights, and it's not exact. He would always have to tilt, and the Meicha would keep on losing. Like this, you do 1 tilt with 10 liters, and he doesn't lose. The fulcrum of a balance scale, the fulcrum, again, I told you, is the little ball. Let's say you have a pole hanging from the ceiling, and then you had the bar, which held the 2 trays. So for the bar to tilt, to move around, you had the fulcrum that was like a ball that was like held on to the bars, and the bars were able to move because of that ball. That's called a fulcrum. Says the Gemara that was which would is tluya bava b'shleisha tvachim. Has to be, if it's a weight that's hanging from the ceiling, it has to be 3 tvachim from the ceiling chalapachis. Ugevay ben aretz, if it was a weight from the ground that had, and the bar that went the vertical bar that was holding the 2 trays had to be 3 tvachim above the ground. V'hakano misna, and the pole, meaning the horizontal pole, the straight pole that came up from the ground, had to be 12 tvachim. Had to be 12 tvachim. I left out V'hakana, and the stick that held the 2 trees, umasta, and the strings that held the tray on the scales. You have the stick that's supposed to hold the 2 trays, but the trays there were strings that held the tray from the 2 sides. So he says, umista shalosh shnei masa tvachim. That means the kana was 4 tvachim, and the ropes on each side also altogether was 4 and 4, so it was 4, 8, 12. It was 12 tvachim altogether. Shel tzamarim, and those that sold wool, v'shel zagonim, and those that sold glass, tluy ba'aver, and they used a scale that came from the ceiling. Shnei tvachim, then it has to be only 2 tvachim from the rooftop. Ugavayam, and on the kappa, Ugavayam in aretz, and it was above the ground. Shnei tvachim, meaning the pans were above the ground 2 tvachim. The kanol masna shalosh tes tvachim, and the beam and the strings of the scale had to be a total of 9 tvachim in length. V'shal chamini v'shal balabayis, and the fulcrum, again, that's that ball of the scale of a storekeeper and a household, that's luivav tefach, has to be suspended only from the ear, a tefach from the ceiling. Ugvei v'na'aretz, and if it's a scale coming from the ground, it has to be above the ground, a tefach. Kano masna shalosh shisha tvachim, and the beam that came up from the ground and the strings of the scale. I'm sorry, here we're talking about the beam that held the 2 trays. And the beam and the strings of the scale had to be a total of 6 tvachim in length. Because the more scheded you needed the scale to turn higher. And if you didn't have, by the heavy stuff, you needed a minimum of 3 tvachim, that the whole scale should be able to tilt and not hit the roof. But if it was much smaller items, you didn't need that many tvachim for the scale to tilt. Veshel tutani. Tutani is another lashon of the fulcrum, which is the ball, which the beam hinged on. But if it's totani, that fulcrum of a smith who deals with special diamonds, precious metals, tluy ba'ava shalosh etzba'is, all you need is 3 finger breadths, because we weren't dealing with heavy stuff. And the pans must be raised above the ground at least 3 finger breadths. And the beam and the strings of the scale, he says he didn't, I don't know the exact measurements. Now the Gemara is going to deal with the Hakamaisa. I'm sorry, the Gemara is going back to before. The Hakamaisa, only now to what does the first halacha apply? That was mentioned in the Braisa, that there has to be 3 tvachim, the mai. What kind of category of maznayim scale would these shirim referring to? What kind of merchandise? Papa said, the grumi. This refers to scales of smelters, smiths that dealt with copper and iron, where you're talking about heavy items. Just like you said, it's forbidden to use scales which are not right. So too they said it again to Tuma, that if the scale wasn't a fitting scale to use for weighing, so then if it touched any of the items, okay, the trays is a kli on its own, so only the tray itself will become tamei. But even though it's part of a whole scale, the whole scale wouldn't become tamei. But if the whole scale was a kli that was used for measuring or for weighing, so even if it touched one thing of the scale, the whole scale is considered as one kli, and the whole thing will become tamei. In fact, what is he coming to teach us? He's coming to teach us. First of all, we already learned in the Mishnah. That we already learned that the length of the rope of a storekeeper and of a household scale is a tefach, and the string is like the handle. The string is talking about this from the ceiling holding the scale. So we already learned that it's a tefach. So that's the shir that's said by Maznayim that is fitting. And when you want to kano business shalah, he's talking about with regard to the beam and the strings that held the trays of the scale. So Abmani Patish needed to tell us this halacha, the loithan, because we didn't learn this in the Mishnah. This is something that we didn't learn in the Mishnah. So Abmani came to tell us that even these shiurim, Linyan Tuma is the same shiurim. The same shiurim that we learned in the Braisa B'Nageya. If it's good for weight, then it's the same shiur for Tuma. And if they don't have it doesn't have the right shiurim, then it's not chashuv like a kli to become tamei. Tanu Rabbanim Yelent, and Ois Mishkos Loishal Ba'atz. You don't make weights from tin. V'loishal Avar, not from lead. V'loishal Gistein, and you don't make it from alloy. It's another type of a metal. V'loishal Shaminim Atachis, nor from any types of metals. And the Rashbam says because they diminish after a little time. Nischakim they become rubbed off, diminished, rusty, and they become smaller b'meshach zman. But he could make it from hard. He can make it from a stone. So he says here from a stone or from glass, and he says the reason is because they don't get rubbed down, smaller, and they don't become rusty. Hamachak shel delas, the tool that you use for leveling cannot be made from the shell of a gourd, because it's very light, so it's not going to really smoothen out anything. And you cannot use a metal because it's too heavy. So it's going to be if it's too heavy, the meicha is going to be losing. The kain is going to be losing. Or you can make it from walnut, or from sycamore, or from eshkereya. It's called boxwood. He says that's a tool that could be used, that will do it right. The level shouldn't be made that one side should be wide and the other side should be narrow, because whenever he wants to, if he's the seller, he's going to use the wide, the narrow side, because he'll dig in more and get rid of more. If he's the buyer, he'll use the wider side, so he won't lose so much. And then he says, "Lo yim ha'vasachas." Here he brings down, because the narrower side goes into the pile more deeply than a wide one. So again, like we explained, so sometimes the meichel will be losing, sometimes the lekeich will be losing. One shouldn't use the level, the whole entire measure at once, with one sweep. Because one who does it with one sweep, it is bad for the seller. And it's much more beneficial for the buyer, because he's getting much more. Because a quick sweep doesn't level the measure effectively, the Rashbam says. It doesn't come down and one should not level the measure in small increments, because it's now bad for the buyer and much better for the seller, because he's taking off much more. When one levels a small section at a time, so he's able to go deeper. If he's taking a small section, he goes deeper and he's getting rid of much more. And so the lekeich is going to be losing. On all these ifanim of avles, of sins, of doing the crooked way, he says, woe is to me if I say it, and woe is to me if I don't say it. Because if I say it, I'm afraid that the Ramoyim, the Ganab, will learn how to do the trickery. If I don't say it, maybe the Ramoyim will say, that the Talmid Chachamim are not familiar with our illegal activities, so they'll take advantage. So in order to put them in place, they show, the Talmid Chachamim will show, we know exactly where you stand, that you're shy to do this such evil stuff. Did Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai say this or not? He did say it. And it was based on the following pasuk. It says, Ki yisharim da'achei Hashem, for the ways of Hashem are straight. And the tzaddikim will progress in them, in the right ways. But But in the same token, the Rishayim will stumble in them. That you shall not do wrong in judgment. Bamida, it says in measure, Bamishkal, measure of length that you measure, we're going to talk about it soon. Bamishkal in weight, or Uvamsura in liquid measures. So let's start off with Bamida. Says the Gemara Bamida, Zumididis Karka, this is the measuring of Karka. And the Kavanah is Shalayim, with that rope, you should not, let's say, if it's Shutvim, you shouldn't divide and measure one Shuttiv's filled in the winter and one in the summer. Or two brothers dividing it, like the Rashbam says. What's the problem? Because when you're dealing chevel, he says a chevel hayanimtach belachas sheyimais hakshamim. In the winter time, in the rainy seasons, the string would stretch, and in the summertime, in the summertime, it would shrink. So that's why it's not. You can't do one field in the summer, one in the winter, because they're going to be different measurements. That one should not measure for one of the shutvim or for one of the brothers during the summertime and for one of the brothers during the winter time. And when the Torah says about weights, he shouldn't soak the weights in salt. And he brings down why, because it makes it heavier. He says when you put it in melach, it makes it heavier. And when the Torah speaks about the liquid measure, it means that when measuring liquids, you shouldn't allow them to become bubbly. Because bubbly is not really filling it up. When it's bubbly, it's not filled up to the top. So when you're dealing with just bubbles, which is only a missing of 1 of 100, so he says that she how much more so, then he makes a kavachema when you're dealing with Misuda, which is a liquid measure consisting of only 1/36 of a lug. The Torah was very makbid, concerned about it. So kavachema, how much more so? Shlishis ahin or aviyas ahin. When one should be even more careful when you're dealing with a hin or a half a hin or a quarter of a hin or aviyas ahin or a quarter of a hin, v'loy v'chatzi loy or aviyas, a lug, a half a lug, or a quarter of a lug, with toiman an eighth of a lug, of a chatzi toim, a half of an eighth of a lug. The Gemara will explain what the ochli is. So these are bigger measurements than the frosty part, which is only the bubbly part, which is only 1/100th of a lug. The Torah was telling you to be careful by Mesera. Much more so when you're dealing with bigger shiurim, you have to be much more careful. Rabbi Yehuda said in the name of Rav, it's forbidden for a person to keep undersized or oversized measure in his house. I feel love it. Even if it's used for a urinal, using that measuring cup or whatever it is, that could be used for measure, but you're using it for disgusting thing. You're using for going to the bathroom. Nevertheless, we're concerned you shouldn't have that in the house. You should get rid of it because you can clean it out, and you might come to use it as weights. That this din was not said only in a place where seals are not affixed by the government officials, stamped to say this is a good weight or not. But in a place where seals are placed by the government, so meaning that if a person will not see the seal, he won't take the merchandise that is measured by such a scale which is not stamped by the government. Says the Gemara, and even in the place where they don't have a stamp from the government, this was only in a place when if there are no spot checks carried out in the stores from the government. But if it's a place where they made spot checks, even though there's no seal from the government, less lambar. He doesn't have to be concerned that the scales are not going to be good. So, in fact, the Gemara he schlapt up the Gemara if it's that he says, but it's not so. Even in stores, even if stores are spot checked, it should be us because it's an inaccurate measure. Why? Zimne and the mikri. At times, what could happen? Bein hashmashes. That will happen. A customer will need something. Bein hashmashes right before Shabbos. Umikri v'shakel, and it might occur that the owner will take the false measuring and use it. Tanya nami. So he says, I'll bring you a raya to this halacha. What's that? So he brings that. We learned the midah chasera. He said, if a person cannot keep undersized or oversized measure in his house, even if it's used for disgusting things, we have to still be concerned that he might clean it out and use it. But one should make vessels for dry measures in the following capacity. So, tirkav, v'chatzi tirkav, a tarkav, and a chatzi tarkav. Tarkav is 3 kavim, which is a half a saw. Tarkav, and then the word v'chatzi tarkav would be 1.5 saw. V'kav, and a kav, a chatzi kav, and a half a kav, a reiva, and a quarter of a kav, a toiman, and an eighth of a kav, a chatzi toiman, and a half of an eighth of a kav. These are the kinds of kelim that you should make for dry measures. The uchla and a uchla. So the Gemara is going to ask, okay, we'll leave this for tomorrow.